It's actually a lovely building, that. There was a lot of work and thought went into that. You know, there was trees, some landscaping, outside lights. There was a fountain at the front. It's still there. And it's been, to be fair, it's been upkept very well. But it stood empty. The banks probably own it now. The banks were bailed out by the government. So we all, in effect, the taxpayer probably owns some of that. Very wasteful. And that is multiplied up and down the country. There's thousands of buildings like that, all built in the mid-2000s. What a lovely building that is behind me. Now that was the flagship of this office block estate. Thousands of these built up and down the country. This one behind me was the flagship. Curved, overlooking the countryside. 3 stories. Massive car park. Empty. That building, I remember when it was built. That's never had anybody, any firm, any business in it at all. It stood there for over 15 years. There's been cleaners in. They've kept the grounds, the grass, trimmed the trees, but it's never had anybody in. It's a little bit frozen. But if you look, these safety signs and automatic door signs, they've been there for 15 years. Still relevant, but if we look through here, there's lifts in there. There's even a plant. Somebody's watering that plant. There's a desk, chairs, little table, books. I wonder what the date on those books are. Fascinating. Empty. New flooring. Not a sign of anybody ever being in there. It's a great building, that. It's a shame it's never had anybody in it. As I said, this was the flagship building on this particular development, just outside Newcastle. I can think of half a dozen others just in this area. There's one in Teesside Park, along by the river. I used to work there in 2004. Since then, there's been a sign on the side of that building, a massive banner to let. You know, it's about 6 or 7 office blocks, 3 or 4 stories, and half of them have stood empty. So you ask yourself, you say, well, who loses out in situations like that, when there's mass development? So much work and design gone into this building. If you look at the top there, there's the little step ladders, look, for the fellas, for the maintenance fellas to look after the lifts. That's another thing. Those lifts, there's 2 or 3 lifts in there, never been used. What I have just noticed at the far end of the car park are these little mini beast hotels, they're called. There could well be a few things hibernating in those, so at least the land's been used for something. And I suppose, you know, when you ask who loses out, well, the developers would have borrowed money to build these. And then the pension funds, insurance companies, big investors would have bought them, expecting to get some sort of rental return. So that's, you know, all of our pensions. So they'll now no longer be getting a return. The builders probably got paid. The developers probably went bust, or some of them will have. So if that happened, the banks repossess these buildings. So then the banks are sat on buildings that they can't get a return on. As we know, 2008, 2009, the banks went bust, almost. They were bailed out by the government. So at the end of the day, I suppose it's us, the taxpayers, that end up bailing these costly mistakes out, which affects us all. It's just a reminder again, as if you didn't need one, that the big corporations, the banks, the insurance companies, the developers don't believe what you're told, and don't believe what the government tell you either. They don't know. They jump on the bandwagon. House buyers do it. Property developers do it. They jump on a bandwagon in the middle of a boom. It's always in the middle of a boom. And then things collapse and they think, oh God, didn't see that coming. Well, you know, keep your eyes open. You can see these things coming. This is another example, just north of Newcastle again. These ones behind me, that one in the distance. So yet again here we see buildings, they've never had anybody in them, they've stood empty 12, 13 years, there's still development going on further down. Somebody either owns these, probably the banks, the developers will be long gone. Whoever bails out the banks, government, taxpayers, we pick up the tab. Perhaps the banks are sitting on thousands of buildings like this, they don't know what to do with them. That's the other one, just behind there. Never had anybody in it. Just have a little look inside. Look, nice new floors, double doors, a lift. Yet again in this building, it's 2-3 stories, completely empty. Magnolia paint from 2007. There's never been anybody in there. There's a lift. That lift, you know, possibly doesn't work now. You can buy this one if you want. They've given up trying to rent it out. I don't know what you'd do with it, like. Behind me, there's a road. Disappears into that field. Well, it would have done, but they stopped it. It's never gone anywhere. So there's a roundabout and a road that stops a third of the way into a field. What do you think of that? And there's a lot of effort and thought gone into these buildings. Look at that spiral staircase at the back there with some strange smoking cover at the top. That's amazing the thought of that. Let's protect the let's have a little heightened smoking area. I'll show you the rest of the estate. Some of these other buildings are now filled, and they do look quite pleasant. Nice little environment, but still an awful lot of waste. And this is what happens if you build, buy in the middle of a boom. It should be obvious that there's a boom. If there's loads of lending, sky-high prices, you're left over a decade later with buildings like that. Perfectly fine building, completely empty. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I find things like this quite interesting, a bit different. Abandoned offices, and this will be the case up and down our green and pleasant land.